New York University's Stern School of Business had always been a battleground for intellectual debate, but no one had expected an ideological war to break out between a renowned liberal professor and the son of the sitting U.S. president. Professor Richard Caldwell, a staunch progressive economist, had made a name for himself as a fierce critic of President Donald Trump's policies. He regularly lambasted the administration on national television, calling its economic strategies a house of cards built on ignorance. His sharp tongue and unwavering ideology had earned him both admiration and enemies. But it was his latest stunt that sent shockwaves through the university. During a heated lecture on meritocracy, a student raised a provocative question. "Professor, what do you think of Barron Trump? Some say he's a genius, others say he's just a privileged kid writing his father's name." The room fell silent as students eagerly awaited Caldwell's response. He smirked, adjusting his glasses, and leaned forward. "A genius?" he scoffed. "Please. I highly doubt Barron Trump has anything more than a silver spoon in his mouth. Intelligence isn't inherited through wealth. I bet my entire tenure that he wouldn't stand a chance against a real intellectual in an IQ test." Laughter rippled through the lecture hall. But one student wasn't amused. Michael Hastings, a junior majoring in finance, had attended a private event where Barron Trump gave a talk on artificial intelligence and blockchain technology. Unlike his father, Barron had a quiet, analytical demeanor, and his insights had been profound. Michael leaned back in his seat and folded his arms. "What if you're wrong, Professor? Would you be willing to test that theory?" Caldwell chuckled. "Are you suggesting I challenge Barron Trump to an IQ test?" "Exactly," Michael said, holding his gaze. "You claim he's just privileged, but what if he's actually smarter than you?" The challenge electrified the room. Caldwell, known for his ego, couldn't resist. "Fine. If Barron Trump has the courage to accept, I'll gladly put him to the test. And when I win, perhaps we can put to rest this ridiculous notion that the Trump family breeds intellect." Little did he know this would be the greatest mistake of his career. The story quickly went viral. Conservative news outlets picked it up, mocking the professor's arrogance, while liberal media framed it as a fight against privilege. Within days, the internet was ablaze with debates. Was Barron Trump actually a genius? Would Caldwell prove his point or embarrass himself? Then, to everyone's astonishment, Barron Trump responded. In a brief yet confident statement, he accepted the challenge. "I respect Professor Caldwell's academic achievements. If he wishes to measure intelligence through an IQ test, I am more than happy to participate. Let's make it public." The gauntlet had been thrown. A week later, the event was set. A live, publicized IQ test between Barron Trump and Professor Richard Caldwell at NYU Stern's Grand Auditorium. No one could predict what would happen next. The anticipation surrounding the IQ showdown between Barron Trump and Professor Richard Caldwell reached a fever pitch. The debate had evolved beyond mere academia. It was now a cultural war, a battle between old-school liberal academia and the unexpected rise of a young Trump. NYU Stern's Grand Auditorium, which normally hosted finance and business conferences, was now packed with students, faculty, journalists, and political commentators. The event was set to be live-streamed on multiple platforms, drawing millions of viewers from across the nation. As the cameras panned across the audience, the contrast was stark. On one side sat Caldwell's colleagues, progressive professors and students who viewed the event as a chance to prove that intelligence wasn't something a rich kid could buy. On the other side, young conservatives eager to see an Ivy League intellectual humbled by the son of the sitting president. Then came the moment of truth. Barron Trump walked onto the stage. At just 18, he towered over most of the people in the room at 6 feet 7 inches. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, he moved with quiet confidence, his expression unreadable. Despite the media storm, he hadn't engaged in Twitter battles or made public statements. He had simply shown up ready. Professor Caldwell, on the other hand, looked uncharacteristically tense. Dressed in his usual tweed jacket, he adjusted his tie and gave a brief nod to the moderator, renowned psychologist Dr. Evelyn Carter, who had been chosen to ensure the test's fairness. The format was simple. Both participants would take a supervised, standardized IQ test on stage. It would measure problem-solving skills, logical reasoning, spatial intelligence, and pattern recognition. Their results would be revealed in real time. Before the test began, the moderator addressed the audience. "This is not a debate. It is not a political contest. Intelligence is measured in many ways, but today we are using a controlled test. May the best mind win." A hush fell over the room as the test began. The two challengers sat at separate tables, each with a blank sheet of paper and a tablet displaying the timed questions. The first round focused on pattern recognition, complex sequences of numbers, shapes, and logical progressions. Barron leaned forward, his fingers gliding over the screen as he selected his answers. His face remained impassive, his eyes darting quickly as he processed information at lightning speed. Caldwell, on the other hand, was visibly sweating. While he was a brilliant economist, he hadn't taken an IQ test in decades. His fingers hovered over the screen, hesitating slightly. The next section focused on mathematical reasoning. Advanced algebra, probability puzzles, and abstract problem solving. Again, Barron worked methodically, his long fingers tapping the screen with precision. Caldwell, who had always relied on calculators and spreadsheets, struggled. His confidence was slipping. The final section, spatial intelligence. This was where true genius often shined. The test displayed three-dimensional objects, asking the participants to mentally rotate and predict their next form. This was the moment when Caldwell's face lost all color. He couldn't keep up. The audience, once buzzing with excitement, had gone eerily quiet. Even Caldwell's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they saw their champion struggling while Barron breezed through each question with ease. When the timer buzzed, signaling the end of the test, Caldwell let out an audible sigh. Barron, ever composed, placed his tablet down and folded his hands, waiting for the results. Dr. Carter smiled politely and took the tablets, running the automated scoring system. The numbers flashed onto the screen and the final scores appeared before the stunned crowd. Professor Richard Caldwell, 132 IQ, highly intelligent but below genius level. Barron Trump, 157 IQ, genius level intelligence, placing him in the top 0.1% of the population. The auditorium erupted. Some gasped. Some cheered. Some just sat in stunned silence. Caldwell's face was frozen. His smug confidence had crumbled into visible humiliation. He had lost. Badly. Meanwhile, Barron simply nodded at the score as if it was exactly what he had expected. He turned to the professor, extended a hand, and said in a measured tone, "It was a pleasure, Professor. I appreciate the challenge." Caldwell hesitated for a long moment before shaking Barron's hand, his face red with shame. As the cameras flashed and social media exploded, the narrative had changed. The liberal professor who sought to humiliate Barron Trump had instead been humiliated himself. And the world was watching. The moment the IQ test results were displayed, the entire nation went into an uproar. News outlets, social media platforms, and late-night talk shows exploded with reactions. The liberal meltdown. Liberal media outlets scrambled to spin the story. CNN ran a panel discussion titled IQ Tests, Are They Really an Accurate Measure of Intelligence? MSNBC brought in psychologists to argue that intelligence is multifaceted and shouldn't be judged by a single test. The New York Times published an op-ed claiming that Barron's victory was a fluke and that Caldwell had been pressured into an unfair public contest. However, none of it could change what had happened. The professor who had arrogantly dismissed Barron as a privileged fool had been bested in front of millions. Professor Caldwell, now an object of ridicule, locked down his social media accounts and avoided public appearances. When NYU was asked to comment, the administration simply stated that academic debates should not be reduced to spectacles. The conservative celebration. Meanwhile, conservative media had a field day. Fox News ran a headline, Genius Trump? Barron's stunning IQ test result humiliates NYU professor. The Daily Wire posted a viral video montage with clips of liberals mocking Barron over the years, followed by the moment his 157 IQ was revealed. Right-wing influencers on Twitter, now X, flooded the platform with memes. A photoshopped image of Barron in a lab coat captioned, "Trust the science." A gif of Professor Caldwell's stunned face captioned, "When you realize the dumb rich kid just outscored you by 25 points. A clip of Barron shaking Caldwell's hand with the caption, "Class versus arrogance." Donald Trump himself, unsurprisingly, couldn't resist chiming in. On Truth Social, he posted, "Wow. My son Barron just smoked a so-called intellectual professor at NYU. Everyone knows he's smart, but this was incredible. Maybe the professor should go back to school?" Sad. Trump supporters rallied behind Barron, calling him the genius Trump and the future of American leadership. Barron's response, a lesson in grace. Despite the frenzy, Barron himself remained composed. He declined interview requests from both conservative and liberal networks, refusing to use the event as a political statement. When a Fox News reporter asked if he had a message for his critics, Barron simply smiled and replied, "I have nothing to prove to anyone. Intelligence is demonstrated through actions, not words. His response only fueled the respect he gained from those who had underestimated him. Meanwhile, at NYU, the mood was tense. Caldwell's colleagues avoided discussing the event, while students, regardless of political beliefs, couldn't help but admire Barron's performance. One student was overheard saying, "I came in thinking this was going to be an easy win for Caldwell. But man, Barron is the real deal." Caldwell, however, wasn't ready to give up. Behind the scenes, he was already planning his next move, one that would only dig him into a deeper hole. Humiliated and mocked by both students and the media, Professor Richard Caldwell found himself in an unfamiliar position on the losing side of a debate he had initiated. For years, he had basked in his role as NYU's intellectual heavyweight, dismantling conservative arguments with ease. But now he was a meme. A punchline. The professor who had lost to a teenager. Determined to regain his credibility, Caldwell devised a plan. He would challenge Barron Trump to a real intellectual contest, one that he believed couldn't be reduced to a simple number on an IQ test. That evening, he took to Twitter. IQ tests measure only a fraction of true intelligence. If Barron Trump believes he's an intellectual equal, let's debate a real topic, economics. A one-on-one, live debate. NYU will host. Will he accept? The tweet gained traction instantly. Liberal supporters cheered him on, calling it round two, while conservatives laughed, claiming Caldwell was just trying to save face. For a full day, Barron didn't respond. Speculation ran wild. Some thought he would decline, unwilling to risk his newfound reputation. Others believed he had already won and had no reason to engage further. Then, Barron broke his silence. He didn't respond on Twitter. He didn't make a press statement. Instead, he sent a single email to NYU's administration. "I accept. The debate is set." The university scrambled to organize the event. Unlike the IQ test, this wouldn't be a solo challenge, it would be a moderated discussion on economic policy. Each participant would be given a series of topics, from inflation to trade wars to tax policy, and asked to present their arguments. News outlets lined up for exclusive streaming rights. Students, still reeling from the last event, camped outside the auditorium for tickets. The debate had transformed into something bigger than just a professor versus a student. It was now a generational battle between institutional academia and the emerging class of self-taught intellectuals. Caldwell, reinvigorated, spent the next week preparing. He studied past interviews of Barron, dissected Trump administration policies, and rehearsed rebuttals. This was his domain. He was an economist. There was no way he could lose. But what he didn't realize was that Barron had been preparing too his entire life. The debate begins. The event was packed. As the cameras zoomed in on the two participants, the contrast was striking. Caldwell, in his usual professor's attire, had an air of forced confidence. Barron, in a simple yet elegant suit, remained as calm as ever. The first question was straightforward. What is the biggest threat to the American economy right now? Caldwell, eager to assert dominance, jumped in first. The greatest threat to our economy is wealth inequality. The Trump administration's tax cuts favored the wealthy, exacerbating the gap between rich and poor. We must return to higher corporate tax rates and stronger government intervention to prevent economic collapse. His supporters applauded. It was a well-crafted, textbook liberal argument. Then Barron spoke. With all due respect, Professor Caldwell, your argument assumes that higher taxes on corporations translate to better economic conditions for the lower class. In reality, studies show that excessive taxation leads to capital flight, discouraging investment and reducing job opportunities. The real threat to our economy is inflation, which stems from reckless government spending, something your policies only encourage. The crowd murmured. Even some of Caldwell's supporters nodded. Barron wasn't just throwing out talking points, he was citing real economic principles. The next question came. How should the U.S. handle trade relations with China? Caldwell took a deep breath. Tariffs have been a disaster. Trump's trade war with China only hurt American businesses. We need to ease restrictions, rebuild relations, and focus on global cooperation. Again, applause. Barron, unfazed, responded. Professor, with respect, that argument ignores basic economic leverage. Free trade is ideal in theory, but China doesn't play by free market rules. They manipulate their currency and exploit trade loopholes. Tariffs weren't about punishment. They were about positioning. The goal was to bring China to the negotiating table on equal terms, which is exactly what happened. Removing those tariffs unilaterally would be economic suicide. Caldwell's face tightened. He had expected a typical Trump defense. Instead, Barron had articulated a real strategy. The questions kept coming. And with each round, it became clear Barron wasn't just a kid with a high IQ. He understood economics. By the final question, the audience knew what was happening. The professor had lost. Again, the defining moment. In his closing statement, Caldwell tried to salvage his position. I admire Barron's knowledge, but at the end of the day, policy should be shaped by decades of research, not the opinions of someone who hasn't yet entered the workforce. Experience matters. Barron smiled. Experience is valuable, Professor, but bad experience leads to bad decisions. Just because someone has spent decades in academia doesn't mean they understand the real-world consequences of their theories. Ideas should be tested, not just taught. The room erupted in applause. This time, even some of Caldwell's supporters clapped. The debate was over. And just like before, Barron had won, not by insults, not by emotion, but by sheer intellect. Caldwell, defeated yet again, slumped in his chair, and Barron Trump walked off the stage, having just cemented his place in history. The debate's fallout was even bigger than the IQ test spectacle. This time, it wasn't just about numbers, it was about substance. The media spin, round 2. The mainstream media found itself in an awkward position. While they had dismissed the IQ test results as meaningless or a lucky fluke, they couldn't do the same with Barron's debate performance. He had gone toe-to-toe with an experienced NYU professor on economic policy and won. Some liberal pundits tried to downplay it. MSNBC's evening panel framed it as a well-rehearsed performance, not genuine expertise. The New York Times published a piece titled, Barron Trump, a future political figure, or just another privileged Nepo baby? But the damage control wasn't enough. Barron's name was now synonymous with intelligence, rational discourse, and humility, 3 traits his critics had long denied him. Meanwhile, conservative media couldn't get enough. Fox News ran an entire segment called The Making of Barron Trump, America's Brightest Young Mind? The Daily Wire called it the greatest intellectual upset in modern academia. Ben Shapiro even dedicated a podcast episode to analyzing Barron's arguments, calling him shockingly well-versed for an 18-year-old. Even some liberals had to admit it, Barron wasn't just another Trump. Caldwell's downfall. For Professor Richard Caldwell, the humiliation was absolute. First, the memes returned. This time, they were even more brutal. A side-by-side image of Caldwell before and after the debate, captioned, "The moment you realize your entire worldview just got wrecked by a teenager." A gif of Barron walking off the stage, with the words, "Another one bites the dust." A cartoon of an NYU lecture hall with students wearing Barron 2028 shirts while Caldwell looks defeated at his podium. It wasn't just social media, his career took a hit too. NYU students, once his loyal supporters, now openly questioned his credibility. His lectures saw a noticeable drop in attendance, and conservative students, who had once feared speaking up, now openly challenged him in class. It wasn't long before NYU released an official statement. Professor Caldwell has decided to take a leave of absence for personal reasons. Everyone knew what that meant. Barron Trump's future, a rising star. For Barron, life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be after publicly humiliating a well-known professor. His social media followers skyrocketed. Colleges and think tanks invited him to speak. Even major political figures, both conservative and moderate, started reaching out. Some Trump supporters began floating the idea of Barron as the future of the movement. Barron 2028 trended on Twitter. Merchandise with his name on it started appearing online. But despite the hype, Barron himself remained quiet. When asked in an interview if he had political ambitions, he simply responded,